So we've seen how this appeal to potential might seem philosophically tempting. What I want to do now is explore it a little bit further. The suggestion I'll make overall is that though the best version of a pro-life position is somewhere in this ballpark, because it's something like Marquis's position, it isn't exactly here. It doesn't exactly involve an appeal to potential. But we need to do a little more to see why that might be so. So start out with a formulation of, this alternate view, so we can go to the slide here. So cool. So what we've got is, we've got the suggestion here, and then we've got a revised version of the argument. This slide's a little suboptimal in that it doesn't have the premises numbered, and the premises 1 and 2 numbered, which you might want to do in your notes. They instead have those bullety things in front of them. So this appeal to potential has, as we've said, a positive feature that it avoids the claim that it's biological, this mere biological property that's the morally crucial one. It does, however, face other important objections, right? So the objections are basically of two kinds. One kind of objection says this approach is mistaken in thinking that potential x's count morally just the same way that actual ones do. Right? Consider two ways to make that objection. So one of them, this is what Peter Singer does, goes like this. So what Peter Singer says fairly explicitly is the person making this appeal to potential must be assuming the truth of some general principle to the effect potential x's count the same as, have just the same rights as actual x's do. Right? But he says there are lots of examples that show that's false. Right? Consider potential kings or potential doctors. Right? So Prince Charles is the potential King of England, right? I mean, under normal circumstances, you expect that he'll become King of England. I mean, probably not for very long, but because he's getting on a bit, and his mother seems to be doing fine, so far as I know, and whatnot. But he's nonetheless liable to become king, right? Furthermore, there are certain sorts of, at this point, largely ceremonial and symbolic, but nonetheless vestigial sort of constitutional powers that British kings have, right? So they have the analog of the signing power that American presidents have, right? So a piece of legislation passed by the House of Commons does not become law until the monarch signs it. Right? Now, of course, they always do sign it these days, and if they didn't, it'd be a terrible constitutional crisis and whatnot. But still, that's how it works. Right? They don't sort of exercise the veto power the way that American presidents routinely do. Still, in all, they have that power, right? But it's only monarchs who have that power. I mean, if Prince Charles, a qua potential king, signs a bit of legislation, that doesn't make it into a law. Right? Similarly, potential doctors, right? I mean, first-year medical students, they're potential doctors. They're, under the normal course of development, you expect they'll become doctors. But there's a whole bunch of things like that real doctors can do that first-year medical students can't do. So Singer says this kind of general assumed principle, potential x's have just the same rights as actual x's do, is mistaken. Warren wants to make the same case in a rather different way. She wants to do it with more science fiction examples, right? Here's the initial version of the science fiction example. So this is it's the final paragraph on page 115, going over to 116. She writes, suppose that our space explorer falls into the hands of an alien culture, whose scientists decide to create a few 100,000 or more human beings by breaking his body into its component cells, and using these to create fully developed human beings with, of course, his genetic code. We may imagine that each of these newly created men will have all of the original man's abilities, skills, knowledge, and so on, and also have an individual self-concept. In short, that each of them will be a bona fide, though hardly unique, person. Imagine that the whole project will take only seconds, and that its chances of success are extremely high, that our explorer knows all of this, and also knows that these people will be treated fairly. I maintain that in such a situation he would have every right to escape if he could, and thus to deprive all of these potential people of their potential lives. For his right to life outweighs all of theirs together, in spite of the fact that they are all genetically human, all innocent, and all have a very high probability of becoming people very soon, if only he refrains from acting. So the argument here, I think, is interesting, but it's in multiple ways problematic. One problematic feature, and it's worth talking just a little bit about this. One problematic feature is it's pretty explicitly a cloning example, right? And when people notice that, there's a tendency to have two interestingly sort of mutually contradictory and equally mistaken reactions, right? So the two standard mistaken things people think about cloning is, A, they think cloning is sort of a way to extend your own life. So they think the clone will be, you know, it'll be you, right? It'll be the very same person, right? The other mistaken thing of you know, pointing in the sort of very opposite direction people often think about cloning is the clone will not be a sort of a person at all, right? Since it's produced by this process, it would be perfectly reasonable to use it as a source for organs and this and that. You know, it wouldn't have rights the way persons do, right? I mean, you see why these sort of seem contradictory, right? One of them says, you know, it's not merely a person, it's the very same person as you, and the other says it's not a person at all. Right? I mean, both of those are, on reflection, foolish views, right? I mean, the sensible view about cloning, you know, I mean, there's no reason to believe that anything like this is at this point as a reproductive process possible, but I mean, it's a, you know, it's another form of reproduction, right? And, you know, the fact, if it is a fact that the beings produced by it are not genetically unique, no more means that they don't count than the fact that some identical, well, maybe all identical twins are not genetically unique means they don't count. So first thing you've got to do to sort of deal with this example is try to divest yourself of any of these contradictory, mistaken thoughts that the notion of cloning has a tendency to evoke. Right? When you've done that, though, I mean, there's still funny things about this example that that Warren gives, right? One is she focuses on sort of what the space traveler who's been captured is allowed to do in self-defense, right? And it may well be that, you know, or someone might think, right, it's, you know, it's perfectly reasonable in self-defense for the space traveler to try to escape, but that's a different thing from the question, what should some third party do? If some third party is trying to weigh the, you know, potential persons against the actual one. Right? The other thing that, I mean, it might be alleged to be problematic here is that the potential persons in this example sort of aren't around yet, right? So some people who want to lay stress on this appeal to potential want to say, well, you know, it's not, you know, it's not just the potential. You've got to have sort of the being there with the potential already, and you don't have that in this case either. So I guess I think there is an important objection here. I think it's really better made the way that Singer makes it than it is the way that Warren makes it. The other key objection is the objection that the appeal to potential is liable to turn an anti-abortion argument into an anti-contraception argument. Now, I mean, there are some people who wouldn't be worried about that, right? I mean, there are people who think abortion's wrong and contraception's wrong, and they're both equally wrong and for the same reason. Right? But that's not most people, right? I mean, most people who are morally troubled by abortion are not similarly morally troubled by contraception. And if you can persuade them that an anti-abortion argument turns out to be an anti-contraception argument as well, then, you know, that'll make them think there's something wrong with the anti-abortion argument. So how is the appeal to potential liable to turn into an anti-contraception argument? Well, first off, you can see how it is liable to happen sort of abstractly, right? Look, I mean, if what makes abortion wrong is that you prevent the, you know, realization of a certain potential, right? I mean, you can say similarly, contraception, where it's necessary, prevents the realization of a certain potential. Right? Now, I don't want to say that this objection straightforwardly faces sort of all versions of the appeal to potential. But it's a standing sort of danger, and it certainly does face some of them, right? In particular, I think a very clear objection to the following unfortunate and unfortunately popular pro-life argument, right? This is the it could have been the person who discovered the cure for AIDS or cancer argument, right? So the person making this argument says, abortion is wrong. Why is abortion wrong? Well, look, think of the potential of the fetus, right? The fetus could have been the person who discovered the cure for AIDS or cancer, right? But look, you then say, I mean, just the same is true of, you know, contraception in any case where it's necessary, right? The individual who would have developed absent the use of contraception could have been the person who discovered the cure for AIDS or cancer, right? Indeed, right? I mean, if you sort of push that argument to what seems like its logical conclusion, you're left with the suggestion that any time you sort of fail to take up an opportunity for reproduction that is available to you, that's wrong, right? Because after all, the individual who developed could have been the person who discovered the cure for AIDS or cancer, right? So that version of the appeal to potential is a very bad argument and clearly faces this danger that it turns from an anti-abortion argument to an anti-contraception argument. Now again, I don't want to say that all versions of the appeal to potential necessarily face this objection, right? Indeed, one of the things we've already talked about just a bit ago, right, is the idea that the person making the appeal to potential says, well, it matters that there's a being there already, right? If the person making the appeal to potential can sort of sustain that, then they can make the differentiation here, right? Because they say in the contraception case, there's no being there yet. Right? You've got to not just be able to say that, you've got to be able to justify it, but you can see how that might go, right? For these two reasons that I want to say, though, the best argument for a pro-life position is somewhere in this ballpark, right? I mean, it's somewhere in the ballpark of the appeal to potential. It's not exactly here, right? Though, as you'll see, I think, in various ways, it too is problematic. I do think the best version of a pro-life argument, certainly in the philosophical literature, is the one that Marquis gives, right? And we'll come back to this, but you'll notice as you read that he's really rather careful to emphasize when he makes his argument that he is not appealing to potential, right? I mean, after he's sort of drawn his conclusion, he makes quite a big deal of that. All right, so the other things we need to do on this topic are to look at the other two pieces, right, which make different arguments. The Thompson argument that doesn't focus on the nature of on humanity or personhood or whatever, but instead focuses on the mother's rights and the idea that they might justify abortion even if the fetus is a human being, and the Marquis piece. I think that the best thing to do is to leave those for our next session. So I think we're done for today.